In the quiet, shadowy corridors of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal history are whispered through vaulted archways and gilded halls, a seismic struggle for power and legitimacy has quietly taken place. It was a confrontation that did not play out before flashing news cameras or through polished press statements issued by Buckingham Palace aides. Instead, it unfolded late at night inside the private quarters of Queen Camilla, when Princess Anne walked in unannounced, holding a meticulous 60-page dossier that effectively dismantled the current administrative strategy governing the royal household. What transpired during those tense hours represents one of the most explosive internal ruptures the House of Windsor has witnessed in modern times. For decades, Princess Anne has been recognized as the ultimate stalwart of the British monarchy, a figure known not for headline-grabbing publicity stunts, lavish lifestyle ventures, or emotional television interviews, but for an unwavering, almost clinical devotion to duty. Performing hundreds of official engagements every year, she has long operated as the steady, quiet backbone of the institution, keeping her head down while others navigated public controversies. Yet behind that stoic facade lies a mind deeply versed in the intricate legalities, ancient charters, and administrative frameworks that keep the crown functioning. When subtle whispers began circulating regarding sweeping changes to how the historical Windsor estate was being managed under Queen Camilla's direction, Princess Anne did not simply schedule a polite discussion or raise concerns at a routine advisory meeting. Instead, driven by a deep-seated commitment to preserving royal precedent, she quietly descended into the depths of the palace archives long before dawn, determined to conduct an exhaustive audit of every land deed, tenant agreement, and property contract drawn up in recent months. Sitting in a cold, windowless records room with nothing more than a thermos of tea, Princess Anne spent painstaking hours cross-referencing 19th-century royal charters against recent administrative filings. What she discovered was a systematic effort by Queen Camilla's administrative team to quietly reclassify historic, protected crown assets into commercial property holdings. To the average observer, reclassifying real estate might seem like an uninspiring administrative detail of little consequence. However, within the strict governing architecture of the British Crown, this distinction carries immense institutional weight. When an estate property is designated as a historic heritage asset, it is governed by rigorous layers of traditional oversight, strict preservation standards, and independent committees designed specifically to prevent hasty decisions or personal exploitation. Reclassifying these assets as commercial properties effectively bypass those protective checks and balances, granting Queen Camilla's inner circle unprecedented leeway to rewrite lease terms, bring in third-party commercial operators, and turn protected historical cottages into lucrative event spaces. To Princess Anne, this was not modernization. It was a dangerous erosion of institutional safeguards designed to protect crown property from short-term financial motives. Her investigation revealed an alarming web of informal verbal arrangements and handshake deals that lacked legally binding documentation, yet were being enforced as binding policy. Nowhere was this administrative overreach more obvious than in the handling of the Royal Lodge estate. Amid ongoing public scrutiny surrounding Prince Andrew and the mounting maintenance costs of his residence, Queen Camilla's office had attempted to quietly resolve the PR crisis by offering unauthorized lease concessions, reduced rental terms, and flexible arrangements through private negotiations that entirely bypassed traditional oversight boards. While Camilla's team viewed this as a pragmatic, efficient attempt to handle a delicate situation without triggering public headlines, Princess Anne recognized the catastrophic precedent it set. Transforming crown land rights into private bargaining chips threatened to undermine the legal foundation of royal property management altogether. Armed with undeniable documentary evidence, Princess Anne compiled her findings into a comprehensive 60-page dossier, complete with annotated historic deeds, altered contract copies, and line-by-line breakdowns of regulatory breaches. She hand-delivered this document directly to the Queen's private secretary with a stern demand for a formal accounting within 48 hours. The arrival of the dossier threw Queen Camilla's administrative team into absolute panic. As aides frantically reviewed the first few pages, they realized that Princess Anne had not gathered vague rumors or emotional grievances. She had identified structural and legal vulnerabilities that could not be easily brushed aside or refuted. Every contract alteration was documented, every bypass committee highlighted, and every legal discrepancy exposed with uncompromising precision. Recognizing that a simple verbal defense would prove useless against such concrete evidence, Queen Camilla's advisors attempted to draft a formal rebuttal, only to find themselves stymied by the absence of a proper paper trail explaining how these policy shifts had been authorized in the first place. The situation escalated to an unprecedented climax when King Charles, fully briefed on his sister's findings, took an extraordinary step that sent shockwaves through the palace infrastructure. Rather than dismissing the dispute as a minor family quarrel, the king formally signed an executive decree granting Princess and temporary absolute authority over all internal operations and administrative reviews at Windsor Castle. When Princess Anne stepped into Queen Camilla's quarters at midnight, she did not arrive to negotiate terms. She arrived to execute an official order backed by the monarch himself. Facing her sister-in-law across the table, Princess Anne laid down the dossier along with the signed royal directive, delivering a clear and non-negotiable ultimatum. The king had reviewed the evidence, recognized the severe risks posed to the institution's long-term stability, and chosen to prioritize institutional integrity over personal comfort. Direct administrative control over the Windsor estate was stripped from Queen Camilla's office immediately. All ongoing commercial negotiations were suspended, and access to central archive records for her staff was revoked, and made it unequivocally clear that any attempt to resist or circumvent these directives would result in the full disclosure of the dossier's findings to the Privy Council. By dawn, the consequences of this dramatic intervention were immediately felt throughout the castle grounds. Specialized security details loyal to the traditional estate structure cordoned off the administrative wing, initiating a total overhaul of daily operations. Modern digital booking platforms were taken offline and replaced with physical ledger books. Digital files were transferred to secure physical vaults, and staff members brought in under the recent administration were instructed to clear their desks under strict supervision. The physical transformation was swift and symbolic. Modern office furnishings and contemporary artwork were promptly removed and replaced with heavy mahogany furniture, signaling an unmistakable return to traditional protocols. Queen Camilla found herself in an extraordinary position of administrative isolation, retaining her official titles and public duties, yet completely cut off from the operational machinery of the royal household. Every schedule, project proposal, and internal directive from her office was subjected to rigorous vetting by a special committee under Princess Anne's direct supervision. As news of this silent coup trickled through the inner circles of British high society, it became increasingly obvious that this confrontation was about far more than property contracts or administrative territoriality. It was a fundamental clash over the core identity and future direction of the British monarchy. As the dust began to settle over the physical transformation of Windsor Castle's administrative wing, the true scale of the philosophical war gripping the House of Windsor began to reveal itself in stark detail. What unfolded in the days following Princess Anne's late-night intervention was not merely a cleanup of bureaucratic mismanagement, but an uncompromising battle for the very soul of the British monarchy. At its core, the clash exposed two fundamentally incompatible visions for how a centuries-old institution should navigate the demands of the modern world. On one side stood Queen Camilla and her modernizing team, who operated under the premise that the royal institution must adapt to contemporary commercial standards to maintain long-term financial relevance. In their view, vacant estate properties represented missed economic opportunities, protected lands were underutilized assets, and ancient oversight committees were frustrating obstacles that delayed progress. They spoke the language of strategic asset management, market valuations, and streamlined decision-making, believing that updating lease protocols and inviting third-party commercial interests into the Windsor fold was a pragmatic way to future-proof the crown. On the opposing side stood Princess Anne, representing a deeply rooted traditionalist philosophy that views the royal estate not as a commercial portfolio to be maximized, but as a sacred sovereign trust. To Anne, the power and legitimacy of the monarchy do not stem from modern efficiency metrics, corporate agility, or short-term revenue generation. They derive from historical continuity, unwavering adherence to precedent, and strict legal stewardship. In her view, The moment the crown begins treating its protected heritage as leverage for private bargaining or commercial gain, it forfeits the moral and constitutional authority that makes it worth preserving in the first place. This fundamental divide became painfully evident in the handling of the Royal Lodge crisis, which had long been a point of friction within the family. For months, public pressure had been mounting regarding Prince Andrew's continued residence at the sprawling 30-room estate, with questions raised over who was paying for its extensive maintenance and whether the arrangement aligned with the king's vision of a streamlined monarchy. Queen Camilla's office had attempted to defuse this public relations nightmare by quietly negotiating flexible lease terms, offering reduced rents, and drafting informal concessions behind closed doors to encourage a peaceful resolution. From Camilla's perspective, resolving the Andrews situation quietly through pragmatic compromise was a sensible way to protect the king from further public embarrassment. However, when Princess Anne examined the paperwork during her archival audit, she recognized that these informal concessions represented a flagrant violation of crown property governance. By granting reduced terms without proper committee approval, Camilla's team had effectively transformed public crown assets into private bargaining tools, setting a precedent that jeopardized the legal standing of every lease across the entire estate. To Anne, allowing such arrangements to stand was far more dangerous to the institution than any temporary public relations headache. Her intervention made it abundantly clear that no member of the royal family, regardless of rank or title, could operate outside the established legal framework of the crown. While Princess Anne executed the administrative shutdown with methodical precision, the position of King Charles throughout the entire ordeal remained intriguingly complex and deliberately shadowed. The king was the one who had signed the executive order granting his sister temporary absolute authority over Windsor operations, a decision that represented a direct and humiliating repudiation of his wife's administrative agenda. Yet, immediately after signing the decree, Charles withdrew into his private study at Highgrove, remaining entirely silent as the operational purge took place. This deliberate silence left palace insiders and senior courtiers debating the king's true strategy. Some veteran courtiers viewed his withdrawal as a masterclass in institutional self-preservation. By allowing Princess Anne to act as the enforcer, the king effectively insulated himself from the brutal political fallout of dismantling his wife's office, and absorbed the personal resentment, executed the necessary firings, terminated the questionable third-party contracts, and restored traditional oversight, while Charles remained above the fray, a benevolent figurehead who could claim he merely acted on impartial evidence to safeguard the crown. However, others within the inner circle viewed the king's retreat through a much darker lens, seeing a monarch deeply torn between his emotional devotion to his wife and his constitutional duty to the throne. By choosing the institution over his personal life, Charles may have secured the legal stability of the estate, but at an immense personal cost. Reports from inside the castle described a heavy, suffocating atmosphere within the royal living quarters, where the king and Queen Camilla now coexisted in a quiet, gilded silence. Their conversations were no longer filled with discussions about estate modernizations or future projects. Instead, an awkward distance settled between them, as both recognized that the trust underpinning their administrative partnership had been shattered. The staff observed the king spending longer hours walking alone through the manicured gardens, looking noticeably worn by the weight of a decision that pitted his domestic peace against his royal duty. Meanwhile, the daily reality inside the administrative offices reflected a total, uncompromising return to traditional governance. The veteran security team brought in by Princess Anne maintained a vigilant presence, ensuring that no unauthorized files, digital devices, or unapproved personnel could access the central archives. The third-party contractors brought in under Camilla's administration were systematically dismissed, their contracts terminated under clauses citing procedural noncompliance. Digital management systems that had been introduced to streamline bookings and commercial inquiries were permanently taken offline, replaced once again by the heavy bound ledgers and formal written correspondence that had governed Windsor Castle for generations. For Queen Camilla, the reality of her new position was a bitter pill to swallow. While she continued to carry out her public duties with graceful composure, appearing beside the king at official ceremonies and charity engagements, Behind palace doors, she was living under what senior staff privately described as administrative house arrest. Her ability to direct staff, initiate projects, or make decisions regarding royal residences was completely frozen. Every single request emanating from her office had to be submitted to Princess Anne's administrative committee for formal review and approval, a process that stripped away all autonomy from the Queen's team. The humiliation was compounded by the knowledge that the 60-page dossier remained locked in a secure vault, ready to be presented to the Privy Council should any attempt be made to overturn the new arrangement. As news of this silent power struggle leaked into the broader network of royal commentators and legal scholars, the episode sparked an intense debate over whether Princess Anne's drastic actions had saved the monarchy from a disastrous governance crisis or simply exposed a deep, irreparable fracture at the heart of the royal family. In the weeks following the complete administrative takeover of the Windsor estate, the ripple effects of Princess Anne's intervention began to extend far beyond the stone walls of the castle, reshaping the strategic landscape of the entire British monarchy. What had started as a covert forensic audit into lease contracts and property reclassifications had now matured into a permanent structural realigning of how royal power is exercised in the modern era. The immediate aftermath exposed the fragile balance between public optics and institutional reality. To the outside world, the royal calendar proceeded with its accustomed precision and pageantry. King Charles and Queen Camilla appeared side by side at state banquets, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and diplomatic receptions, maintaining the polished facade of a unified and resilient monarchy. Yet, behind this carefully curated public image lay an undeniable administrative reality. Queen Camilla's influence over the internal machinery of the royal household had been effectively erased. The ambitious modernization program that her office had spent months assembling, a plan designed to transform historical crown assets into agile commercial revenue streams, was not merely paused. It was systematically dismantled. Every commercial contract initiated under her tenure was subjected to rigorous legal review by Princess Anne's newly established governance committee. Projects that failed to meet the strict historical and legal standards of traditional crown charters were summarily cancelled, and third-party commercial entities were quietly escorted off palace grounds. For the staff who had aligned themselves with Queen Camilla's modernizing vision, the transition was swift and unsparing. The open-plan, collaborative workspaces that had been set up inside the administrative wing were cleared out within days, replaced once again by the heavy mahogany desks, physical filing systems, and strict hierarchical protocols that had defined the late Queen Elizabeth's reign. The message conveyed by these physical changes was unmistakable. The experiment with corporate-style asset management was officially over, and the traditionalist wing of the family had reclaimed absolute control over the crown's physical inheritance. The consequences for King Charles were equally profound, casting a long shadow over the future of his reign. By signing the executive order that granted Princess Anne temporary absolute authority, the king had successfully insulated the institution from severe governance vulnerabilities and potential public exposure. He had proven that when forced to choose between personal relationships and constitutional duty, the integrity of the crown would always take precedence. However, the domestic toll of this decision became increasingly apparent to those within his immediate circle. Senior aides observed a monarch who appeared increasingly isolated, spending long hours in solitude within his private study or walking silently through the estate grounds. The warm, collaborative dynamic that had previously characterized his relationship with Queen Camilla was replaced by a formal, distant coexistence. While they continued to function as professional partners in public, the operational trust between them had been irrevocably damaged. Camilla found herself in a position of unprecedented institutional confinement, retaining her title and ceremonial status, yet stripped of any meaningful authority over her own household or schedule. Every initiative, staff appointment, or public statement originating from her office had to pass through Princess Anne's security and administrative filter. The 60-page dossier, containing detailed evidence of bypass committees and unauthorized lease concessions, remained stored in a secure vault, serving as a silent but powerful reminder of the boundaries that could not be crossed. Meanwhile, Princess Anne's role as the primary guardian of the monarchy's core foundations was cemented in a way that few could have anticipated. For decades, She had been content to operate in the background, quietly fulfilling her extensive schedule of public duties while staying far removed from palace politics and media narratives. Yet, when she recognized a genuine threat to the legal and historical integrity of the crown, she acted with a level of clinical efficiency and operational competence that left her rivals utterly powerless to resist. She did not engage in public spats or leaks to the press. Instead, she used the institution's own ancient rules, legal charters, and administrative frameworks to neutralize an entire modernizing agenda in a matter of days. In doing so, she demonstrated that true power within the House of Windsor does not belong to those who seek to reshape the institution for short-term convenience, but to those who understand and respect its historical foundations. As the new governance committee consolidated its control over the Windsor estate, the long-term implications of this internal struggle began to clarify. The Royal Lodge dispute, which had sparked the initial investigation, was resolved not through pragmatic political deals or private rent discounts, but through strict enforcement of Crown property protocols. Prince Andrew was brought under the same uncompromising legal standard as any other tenant, making it clear that informal family arrangements would no longer be tolerated under the new administrative regime. The digital booking platforms and commercial lease models introduced by Camilla's team were permanently retired, replaced by traditional ledger entries and formal committee reviews that ensured complete transparency and adherence to historical charters. The Windsor estate was returned to what Princess Anne described as its sovereign purpose, a sacred trust governed by continuity, stewardship, and tradition, rather than market logic and corporate efficiency metrics. Ultimately, the dramatic events inside Windsor Castle serve as a defining chapter in the ongoing story of the British monarchy's survival. The battle between Queen Camilla's modernizing ambition and Princess Anne's traditionalist resolve revealed that adaptation without strict boundaries is not modernization, but erosion. By stepping in to enforce those boundaries, Princess Anne did not merely win a power struggle. She reaffirmed the fundamental principle that the crown's legitimacy rests upon its refusal to compromise its core identity for temporary convenience. As the monarchy continues to navigate the complexities of the 21st century, the quiet authority established during those midnight hours in Windsor Castle remains a powerful reminder that while individuals may hold high titles and wear royal crowns, it is the timeless institution itself, and those dedicated to protecting its true foundations, that will always hold ultimate power.